my body accepted the truth that my life was insignificant, and that like I was already
interesting.
dead. That like in this time scale of the universe, that like I'm dead tomorrow.
Yeah. What's up, you guys? In my new episode of the Heart Speaks podcast, I speak with my friend Sun Katayama, an aficionado in photography, massage therapy, and Tantric Buddhism, a specific form of Buddhism near and dear to my heart. Tantra is all about the transformation of desire. So, as you can imagine, in this episode, we got deep down and juicy about how to take our desires, erotic and otherwise, and transform them into a desire for the divine, so that we might see the divine in everyone and everything under the sun. Enjoy. So we met at our dear friend Ali Hoffman's Shabbat sessions, and you are the resident photographer of that special evening. We are both going to be attending another Shabbat this evening, which will be fun. And I remember us bonding for the first time over our mutual interest in Tantra or Tantra. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that word. But yeah, Tantric Buddhism. I'm curious, like, what your whole relationship to that is. I know obviously we've talked about it interpersonally, but I would love for you to share that with the audience. And actually, before you dive in, just tell everyone who you are, what you do, what you're about, anything you want to share.
Yeah. I was imagining just taking the invitation to tell like a very long story about my relationship to Tantra that would just kind of like encapsulate the whole story. But yeah, my name is Sun Katayama. I am right now primarily a massage therapist, but I also do photography. I build websites and do digital marketing and branding, and occasionally teach meditation and all the Brooklyn things, I suppose.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Let's see. When I think about like my relationship like to Tantra, it feels like to me like a landing place after like a very long journey about my relationship to like just Buddhism and life in general. And Tantra actually, my kind of introduction to Tantra was through a book entitled Introduction to Tantra by Lama Yeshe, who is a high order Tibetan Buddhist monk. In that book, they talk about how Tantra as a practice was not actually given to the public. Like this was not like a thing that was available to anybody. It was held secret for a long time because it required a certain amount of advancement in your understanding of Buddhism in general before you could build on top of that your relationship with Tantra as a practice. So I think like actually the way that and the timing in which that book and that this practice has kind of like arrived in my life is kind of at the right time for me as far as my relationship to the fundamentals and basics of Buddhism. So that story I can just like take as an opportunity to just tell my long version of my story. If that's
I would be curious to know more about like how long you've been practicing Buddhism in general. Buddhism entered into my life, I would say, as of 2020. So I haven't been practicing aspects of it for a very long time. I'm curious to learn about your journey with that wisdom tradition.
Yeah. So I think the question honestly goes back to like my earliest memories of being a human being. Like I remember being like 3 or 4 years old and like being very confused about inhabiting a body. I remember like looking at my hands and being very blown away by the fact that there was stuff happening underneath my skin and inside my body that I had no control over, no idea how it was working, why it was working. Like it blew my mind that I had this relationship to this thing that was living, but yet was me, yet was not me. And I think that started leading me down kind of like the large questions in life, like who are we? What is existence about? Like, what does it mean to be part of the universe? Like, I think my dad, like, I wasn't raised with any religion or much, spirituality or anything at all. But my dad used to grow up, or he grew up like going to Buddhist church, like as part of like, more of a cultural like event. Like we still went to the Buddhist church like festival every summer as part of like our family reunion. But like, that's the extent of my relationship to Buddhism at that point, was like eating sushi in the summer.
Yeah.
But he would like kind of plant, I think, koans.
Really?
As we were kids. Yeah.
Can you explain what a koan is? Because like if I was a young kid being told or being given these seeds, I like can't imagine what that would do to me. So
yeah. So koans, and again, my understanding, are tools used primarily in the Zen Buddhist tradition that get you to they're enigmas that are like unanswerable questions that get you to think outside of your perception and understanding of like your relationship to the universe. So, the most popular one is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or if like a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound?
I didn't realize that was a koan, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are like things that like Buddhist monks would say, like, take this, go to a cave and think about it.
Yeah.
And my dad would ask me things. He's like, oh, what's out beyond the edge of the universe? And like, oh, what's out past that? What's out past that? What's out past that?
That's crazy.
What happened before the beginning of time? What about before that? What about before that? And like, I think like that kind of like, wait, what was before the beginning? Those types of like considering infinity as like a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, for the rest of my life, kind of like lent me into the sciences. And so I ended up studying biology for my undergrad. I think like figuring out this human thing was always like very interesting to me. It's like, how can we live in this thing and not know like what's going on? And then, you learn that biology is like a complicated set of chemistry. And then you study chemistry and you learn that chemistry is like a complicated set of physics. And then you get deep into physics and then you're like, wait, we don't really know what's going on. We've got some good ideas, but
do you remember what specific thing you encountered in physics that made you realize that like we don't actually know what's going on? Was it a specific study or like research thing or something like that?
Yeah, I mean like quantum mechanics, like like quantum tunneling, for instance. Like the way that electrons jump between energy levels is quantized, so they exist at 0 energy levels and will jump to 1 energy level and will not exist in between. Like they cease to exist and then reappear in existence between energy levels. And that's how we have light emitting from everything. That's how the universe works. And even like on the uncertainty principle, that like that particles travel in fields of possibility simultaneously moving through two slits at once, and then their probability of existence like collapses when it interacts with an object. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
If you think about like, you know, our Newtonian mechanical observations, like you think about the reality of that being built on like, no, like you are just a field of probability.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. Like I was just watching a lecture, I think it was done at Cambridge. There's like a famous lecture hall where like, you know, Faraday did his first talks and all that sort of thing. And this physicist was talking about the history of like of particles and how we're taught that like when we grow up, like atoms are like the building blocks of the universe. And
yeah.
So we're like, okay.
I remember learning that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we get it. Okay, cool. Like here's an atom. And they're like, well, you know, you break down those atoms and there's a nucleus, which has protons and electrons. And then you have, or protons and neutrons, and then you have electrons floating around. And like, okay, cool. Like that's the building block of the universe. And then you get further on, they're like, well, right. So those electrons and those protons, those are actually comprised of quarks. And there's quarks that have upspin and downspin. And like, those are the fundamental particles of the universe. And then they're like, right, well, those quarks, it turns out, like, they're actually, you know, perturbations in a field. Like, they're
like
actually...
is that like similar to vibrations? Like, what do you mean by perturbations? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like when we measure like particles, like we're measuring literally like a wave in like an energetic wave in a field. Like, and there's several different fields.
Yeah.
Like the electromagnetic field. But you know, but the thing is that there is only one field. It's not like every particle has its own field. It's literally it. You know, Buddhists have been talking about this for a long time, that we are like a wave on the ocean. Like literally the field is the ocean, and like particles are just these like energy signatures that are like manipulating around. So like, when we're taught as kids that like the fundamental building blocks of the universe is atoms, it's like, no. Like actually the universe is an ocean, and we're just like, everything on it is just like a blip on the surface.
Yeah.
And like, so we are literally one with the universe. Like it's not it's a very physical trait of the universe. Right. So there's all that, you know, so I'm like, so along my life story, I'm like trying to peel back like my perceptions of reality. And this is a very like Zen kind of practice in general of like trying to figure out reality and break our
like illusions. Yeah.
Like you can go through your entire life and never actually question what's underneath your skin. And you can operate as a human totally fine.
For sure. Yeah.
But anyway, so, you know, I was kind of like exploring physics and theoretical physics, and came across some Allan Watts. I don't know if you're familiar with Allan Watts.
Of course. Yeah. I actually I just brought a Gaia subscription. I don't know if you know that platform. And Instagram knows me so well. They were like advertising this to me because they know I like sometimes to listen to Allan Watts, and apparently they have the biggest collection of Allan Watts from like back in the day that you can't find on YouTube, where he was like younger and just starting out. So yeah, I dabble in Allan Watts from time to time.
Yeah, so I think he's a very interesting, good landing spot for a lot of people that are starting to peel back the curtain. And he has a lecture series that's based on a book he wrote called Out of Your Mind. And I came across Out of Your Mind, and you know, I'm kind of like you know, I hate the fact that like Allan Watts audio clips are just like laid over every like house rave track, and it's
yes.
spirituality 101 on the dance floor, you know.
Yeah. There's definitely more intentional. I want to talk about that for a quick second, because
sure,
I was just in Spain, and there was a moment. I was basically going to a lot of raves every night, and there was a moment where one of the DJs started playing a song that had Allan Watts overlaid on it, but it was done very tastefully, and it was also like the one of the few times of all the times that I had heard music that entire weekend that reflected some even bare interest in spirituality. so like I do think it can be done tastefully, but it can also be done in a very trite way, like you're saying right now.
I'm joking.
Yeah.
Because like I kind of love it.
Yeah.
Also, like thank you. Can we all just realize that what's going on is just fucking crazy around us? I think, you know, I'm just like, I guess maybe reflecting my own like insecurity around like Allan Watts told me that the universe is different, which is like, you know, apparently common. But point being that you know, he was somebody who was very studied in the Zen tradition, and Zen, in my understanding of the framework, is much more interested in this the seeking the enlightenment experience, in cracking the codes and expansion of knowledge and understanding, and it's a very cerebral practice and approach to getting to the kind of enlightenment experience, which is why I think it like resonates with a lot of people from the sciences, and resonates kind of with Western thought in general, being, you know, kind of a more kind of like, I don't know, maybe anyway, left brain approach. So at the time when I was listening to Out of Your Minds, that his whole lecture series, I was actually I was working on a PhD in medicinal chemistry at University of Washington in Seattle, and I was like seeing my life unfold in front of my eyes, going into like pharmacy. Like I was getting set up like at Pfizer in San Diego, and like watching like big farm become my like life. And I was like, wait, there's something like wrong here. Not like what I want to be doing with my time. So I ended up like following my passion for craft beer, and I like quit my PhD and I started brewing beer professionally.
Which is a chemical thing, right? It's still...
Oh my God. I you know, it's people are like, oh, that's like, that makes a lot of sense. Like chemistry into like brewing beer, it's the same. But I'm like, you don't actually even really know how similar it was.
Wow.
Like the skill sets, like tactically, of being in a lab and cell culturing E. coli to purify enzymes and protein is like literally the exact same physical skill set that you need to like cell culture yeast to purify beer. Like very translatable skill set. So that was cool. But the interesting thing about brewing beer professionally is that it's very physical and it's very repetitive. So I would start my day every day with like 2,500 pounds of grain on a pallet, and I would like open each bag one by one, 55 pounds, and just like throw them over my shoulder into a mill. And so like I would get into these repetitive motions where my body would start to go on autopilot, and I could like slip into like flow state, and I'd like have to like palletize like 60 kegs and like fork them into a cold room. And over the years of doing that, I would just doing the same things in and out every day. Like I started to be able to use that time to start meditating, where I was like, brewing beer became my yoga. Like this whole monks brewing beer thing is like, that's real. Like it makes a lot of sense. And so I was like listening to Allan Watts, expanding my consciousness, trying to soak up the reality of the universe, of us being one on this wave, and XYZ. And you know, there was a point where I was meditating like 5 hours a day, you know, and there was one night where I like was home and I was just like going to sleep and I was meditating on time. I was thinking about like, oh, like if all the stuff that like I consider to be me right now, like has literally always existed for 13 billion years and like will continue to exist for 13 billion years, like the time that it's organized in this identity is actually like totally insignificant.
Yeah.
And I think there's times when you can speak to your subconscious and it like you can't lie to yourself in a lot of ways. You can't be like, I see that cloth and it's red. And
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's times when you like your subconscious knows the truth. And like I had been meditating on this stuff long enough that like my body accepted the truth that my life was insignificant and that like I was
interesting.
dead. That like in this time scale of the universe that like I'm dead tomorrow.
Yeah.
And what happened was, I think biologically, what happens when people get into these near-death experiences, like if you are in a car accident and then you see liters of blood flowing out of you, you'll tell your body like, oh, I'm dying. And your body will believe you. And when that happens and your body knows that you're dying, I think it just dumps like serotonin, DMT, dopamine, like the whole thing. And like that happened to me. So I'm like sitting there and I'm like, oh, I need to consolidate my death now. And like my body like realized like truthfully that I was dying and dead. And I had this like extreme psychedelic experience. Like I was fully, every fiber of my being was just like vibrating with extreme euphoria and like huge like brain dump.
And it's interesting, your body, it sounds like your body never went into fight or flight.
No, it's because it was like there's nothing you can do against the face of 13 billion years. Like
yeah. But I also think it's probably like the fact that you were meditating 5 hours a day was instrumental to your body not going into fight or flight, or not just 100%. Not even taking that concept seriously,
100%. Yeah. And when in that experience, I had this true like feeling of expansion and of leaving my body, of like, of really becoming one with the universe. Like I was like, well, if this identity is dead, but I still exist, then like I am one with, I'm as much that table as I am my fingernail, as I am my eyeball.
Yeah, it's like co-created. Well, human beings are co-created with the rest of reality on some level.
We're a, like, if the universe is a sheet of fabric, we're a wrinkle on it. Like we're still the fabric.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm not a wrinkle. I'm the sheet.
Oh, I see.
And I fell asleep. and then up the next day and I was like, wait a minute, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Like, do I get in my car and burn fossil fuel to go produce beer for people today? Is that how I spend my day? And it like fucked me up. Excuse me. I don't know if you
no, all good.
Okay. Yeah. So like, I had to really consolidate, and I felt like I needed to make a choice. I felt like I needed to either, one, continue like living as the human being, the identity that I had built for myself, and like just forget that this all happened, or two, I needed to like seriously act on this new information that I have, that like I'm one with the universe, and like actually live accordingly. And when I thought about doing that, I didn't have any clue where to begin. I was like, so
like, what would you do?
Do I get a tent and go into the woods and like fish or become one with nature? Or like, I didn't know how. I wasn't equipped to like deal with it. And unfortunately, I also didn't have like community around me to help me like metabolize that information. I was like doing all of this just alone in a warehouse, you know. And
so
like,
you didn't have any colleagues or friends that you could talk to about this stuff?
I was, you know, drinking every weekend with my college buddies. This was when I was like 25, and like I didn't have a Buddhist community or people that were doing this type of thinking. Like, you know, so, you know, I guess my only option at that point that I felt like I could take was to just like forget that all happened and just go back to being me for a while.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of like entered a stage of nihilism for a while. And I think that this is a trap that Allan Watts himself kind of fell into. Like, he was not a happy human being from my understanding. Like, and I think that the trap is that like nihilism can creep in from the understanding that like really nothing matters,
which is
don't want it to.
Which is interesting because I follow this this amazing cognitive scientist named John Vervaeke. Most of the viewers know this because I always quote him. But he is the person who basically introduced me to like Zen Buddhism and Zen forms of meditation. And he always contrasted actually a very specifically Japanese form of Zen Buddhism. Nishitada, I think, is the name of the last name of the guy who came up with this, I guess, formulation, which is basically, it's going to sound incoherent. It's a koan, but it's the no thingness beyond God. And he contrasted this idea, which I cannot do justice in actually explaining, but if when I read about it, it made sense. Vervaeke contrasted this with Nietzsche's sort of despair and falling into nihilism. And Vervaeke says that, you know, when Nietzsche looked into the abyss, he became, or he saw sort of nihilistic or nihilism, but the problem is that he didn't stare long and hard enough into the abyss, because if he would have stared hard enough into the abyss, he would have seen the abyss staring back at him. He would have been able to see that sort of similar thing that you're saying, the sort of oneness with the abyss itself. And I would highly recommend for those interested in diving deeper this book, The No Thingness Beyond God, which explains this in great detail. It serves as an alternative or even like a remedy for nihilism. So it's ironic that Allan Watts' foray into Zen meditation and Zen Buddhism actually landed him in nihilism, because there are elements of it that could actually be a salve against nihilism. I also want to talk to you later about Everything Everywhere All at Once and sort of film's entire like teaching, but continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that. I'd love to look that up and do some more reading, because I dig that framework, no thingness other outside of God. Like that's my framework too, is that like that all that is, like that's how you define God, is all that is.
Yeah.
That was this like experience of like, okay, zoom out, expand, one with the universe, got it, check. Can't deal with that, go back to being human. So I went back, I like kind of drank myself into oblivion for several years. Like I was already in the alcohol industry, and I was like, whatever, like everything's perfect. Like the universe is unfolding just as it should.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I found Tibetan Buddhism that like it really helped like pull me out of that funk. Tibetan Buddhism was my salve for nihilism, which was that, you know, here are these people that have like been dealing with this problem for many years, and the conclusion that they come to is compassion. And you know, I think that Tibetan Buddhism is less interested in cracking you open, as it is like concerned with, if you do crack yourself open, how do you come back from that and be a good human? Or if you never do crack yourself open, how do you be a good human? You know?
Yeah.
And,
Either way.
Yeah. And I think like the heart-centric approach of like, oh, okay, if you're one with everything, then like love yourself.
Yeah.
And that approach really helped me forgive myself for not living perfectly as God. You know, like
Yeah.
oh, well, like you're also like human, and like you can try to be good and try to like bring light into the universe and love, and also like you were born into middle class America, and like do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I found a teacher here in Brooklyn. His name is Punsak Thupten. He's just a joy of a man. He's a tiny Haitian-born dude who, like, I think he moved to America when he was like 11, and then like lived in a monastery for 20 years. Then like and then he decided to like leave the monastery to come teach meditation to the world, and he's just like his heart is so full of joy. He teaches meditation. I know he's got like a Patreon and a Wednesday night meditation in Bushwick that if people are interested. It's called Home, and his name is Punsak, Puntsok. That should be.
We will link to all the resources in the YouTube. Yeah.
Anyway, that period of time like helped me reorganize my kind of like my worldview, and then also, I mean, we can leave on a whole other tangent, but also started my path down plant medicine work, and really dealing with my human condition.
How long are you with this meditation practice, or are you still with this meditation practice?
Yeah. I think this was like 2016. I think when I first met Punsak, and when things really started like changing around in my life. Meditation practice for me is doesn't really fit many molds. Like my own personal practice like is not like easy to just like explain to people. I don't sit daily on a cushion. I do sit on a cushion occasionally. But you know, my practice is like is a personal thing that I've kind of just like developed over the years.
Sure.
But I think that, you know, Buddhism, funnily enough to me, like I don't see it as a religion or as like, you know, even necessarily a practice or, you know, a spirituality. Like I actually think about Buddhism more as like biohacking, funnily enough. Like it's kind of like a system of describing our relationship, the human relationship to the universe, you know, like the four noble truths are that like life is suffering. And that's like, that's not asking you to believe in God or anything. It's just like, hey, if you're a human, like relativity exists, and we're going to live somewhere on the scale of pain and pleasure, and like that's part of the human condition. So like to me, that's like an interesting framework that like doesn't require you to like subscribe to anything or believe in anything. And there's a lot of tools within, you know, the unfolding different, you know, sects of Buddhism, and I incorporate a lot of those tools, which was how I ended up finding where we arrive now, which is Tantra. So Tantra arrived in a place where, like, you know, when Lama Yeshe in his introduction starts talking about Tantra, like he basically says, in order to begin practice with Tantra, you need to have personal experience and understanding of enlightenment. Like you need to have some sort of taste or flavor or basic understanding of what this thing is. And most people don't have that.
Yeah.
And so like, I think Tantra becoming like popularized and like available in the West and just out there is like fine, but like in this Buddhist tradition, like it's actually built on this understanding. And so like Tantra came to me in this place where like, oh right, yeah, I know this thing, like I'm one with the universe, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I know that comes with a certain set of qualities. Like when you experience that, you tend to associate that experience with like blissfulness, peace, and happiness, and XYZ, like oneness qualities. So Tantra then is a practice of using the human experience on the spectrum of pleasure and pain, to use the experience of pleasure as the anchor for your meditation of oneness.
So what is Tantra's relationship to pain, if any?
In a lot of ways, it's the same. Like, I think that the Buddhists that have been studying this stuff for a long time realized that from your center, it doesn't matter what direction you go, you're going to arrive at the truth. Like, because the truth is there, right?
Okay, yeah.
And famously, Siddhartha Buddha was like, I'm gonna go try the ascetic route, where like I'm gonna not eat for as long as I can and deny myself all worldly pleasures and deny myself food, women, sight, sound, XYZ. I'm gonna go sit on a retreat.
Yeah.
And famously, like there's like Catholic monks that would like whip themselves because they realized that like pleasure was a trap. That, like if you get lost in pleasure, like you're not ascending your energy towards God. You're just like consuming sex, drugs, food, XYZ.
Yeah.
So in order to avoid the traps of worldly pleasures, people would engage with pain and suffering.
He talks about specifically the Christians whipping themselves, and I would like to see what he says. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, dive in. Yeah, so it turns out that the Buddha, after all this time of denying himself food and women and pleasure, he's like dying of starvation under a tree, and like some woman brings him a bowl of rice.
Yeah.
And he eats from this bowl of rice, and that becomes the beginning of his true enlightenment.
Oh, so why that moment itself?
Yeah. So, if you look at like images of Buddha, you see this like fat bellied man, right?
Yeah.
But like he didn't get there by just like indulging in the pleasures of the universe. He had to go the other way first.
I see.
And the connection to eating rice and to enjoying the pleasure of the universe, like he was already so deep in his spiritual practice that like he realized that like, oh, all of what we were thinking of, this like pleasure being a trap of like indulging in worldly desires, is that like pleasure is has hooks in it if you give in to your desire, and if you like displace yourself of like wanting and getting into craving. But pleasure in itself, if without those desires, without those cravings, if you just sit with pleasure, that it's in itself, there's nothing wrong there. It's your own human condition that creates the traps.
I see.
And so he was able to take his experience with pleasure and use that as the anchor for his meditation. And it became easier to do because pleasure has the same polarity as the experience of enlightenment, which is bliss, happiness, euphoria, oneness with the universe. And so when you're trying to turn pain into your meditation on bliss and oneness, it's like opposite polarity. It doesn't mean you won't get there. It's just more challenging. And so that became the basis for Tantra, was like pleasure has this polarity with oneness. And so if you can engage with pleasure without getting lost in the traps, which is the hardest thing to do, is not give into the hooks of pleasure, then that can be the most powerful tool we have to going towards enlightenment. And so that's why Tantra leans into the most challenging forms of pleasure, which is sexuality. We're hardwired into sexuality to be craving and leaning in further and deeper. But if you can master your cravings and desires and separate yourself from that and engage in the pleasure and use that as your meditation, then that can be the most powerful form. Now you can do this with any sorts of pleasure. But the question became like, well, what's the most pleasurable thing we can do that has the most hook? And it's like, well, if you're on the edge of orgasm, like you want to have that orgasm. That's probably one of the most primal, hardwired desires there is. And so if you can unhook yourself from your desire and just sit present in the pleasure experience without wanting, then that can be the most powerful tool that you have to connecting to the same polarity of like the peak levels of pleasure. That's what oneness, that's what enlightenment is like peak levels of pleasure. It's blissful oneness with the universe. So that's why you end up with all of these like tantric sexual practices that are around semen retention and like X, Y, Z.
So I do wonder though if it's easier to do the tantric practice because Siddhartha did. It seems like he first used pain, right? And then he was able to go into pleasure. But are there any like known or famous monks or Buddhists who were able to just reach enlightenment via pleasure alone without going into that, whipping or whatever, that increase of pain deliberately?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, that's an impossible preposition because it's part of the same spectrum. Okay. Like pleasure and pain is part of the same spectrum, and it's relativistic. I see. And the fact that the first noble truth of Buddhism, the first thing they tell you is that life is suffering. Like you can't live a human life and avoid. You can't escape that anyway. Okay. We all have, because whatever experience you're having, it's going to be on that spectrum. So our understanding of pleasure is in fact an experience of the absence of pain in some sense. So it is dependent upon your experience of suffering. Okay, that makes sense. I found one of the passages, although it's more about Tantra than it is about Christians, but it says one of the central themes of the Kama Sutra, as well as more extreme but related tantric texts, is the intensification of desire and the deferment of its satisfaction, so that one might think of these as manuals for the transformation of desire into longing. Now, I can see how like longing itself can be a part of that pain principle, actually, that you reach transcendence through. But I'm curious as to what you might think about that. until the word longing.
Yeah.
This is Lama Yeshe's introduction to Tantra, and the subtitle is The Transformation of Desire.
Mm-hmm.
So like the whole practice of Tantra, like as I understand it, is built on this framework of this working with the suffering and desire and transforming that into your meditation. Now, longing is an interesting word that they use there. So transformation of desire into longing, because it actually, like, the way the word, the place where the word longing shows up the most is actually from, in my mind, Sufism. Have you ever studied Sufism?
No, but I want to.
Yeah. So Sufism is like a mystical sub branch of Islam, and like the most famous Sufi is Rumi. So you've probably heard of all these like Rumi poems that probably at some point have also found their way into some deep house track.
Yeah.
The underlying principle of Sufism is that the experience of being born into humanity is like a reed growing from a river. And when you become born into being a human, it's like you're cut from the reed is being cut from the river, and you're being separated from your oneness. And so like the human condition is actually, like, at its root, it's this longing to return, right? To return back into oneness. And so there's like this whole romantic kind of, all this romance of like longing for love and oneness, and it is a deep spiritual path. But it's interesting that like that word showed up in my mind in this passage as the spiritual path, is that your desire, sexual desire, let's say, is transformed into longing, as in spiritual longing. Is that
so that I would say, like, desire for, like, let's say I have desire for a man. Desire for a man is transformed into the desire for desire itself.
Yeah, so desire, so in my like framework, like desire, so the first noble truth is life is suffering. The second noble truth is your suffering is caused by your desire.
Yeah.
So
I don't know though, it's like you could be playing a semantic game here also,
Yeah. Which is the downfall of all mystical spiritual endeavors.
Yeah. But that's actually reflected in, to sort of take a turn into another tradition, I would say that like certain statutes in the Catholic Church in Rome in particular that display sort of all-encompassing love that, let's say, a saint has for God, which also simultaneously makes like the saint who's depicted looks like they're orgasming, like they're having an orgasm.
Yeah.
In the actual statute or depiction, I think like that is sort of what is being alluded to. Like desire for another human being is transformed into desire for oneness with all things, essentially.
Yeah. That sounds like Tantra to me. Like that sounds like, like that. All of these like holy women draped in their like, nun cloths while they're like giving their O-face in marble, Da Vinci. Is
Bernini. Underrated.
Like that is, part of this definitely kind of like tantric path, is the realization that like that, oneness with God, the closest kind of experience that we have is this like connected into this hardwired experience that we have, which is like orgasmic. But the problem with sex and orgasm is that we love sex.
Yeah.
We love orgasm. We love,
and that's where the hooks come in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's it's alchemizing, it's transforming those hooks into your meditation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful formulation. Switching gears for a little bit, I would love to know your take on, given that we've been talking about Tantra and Buddhism and Zen and all these things, tell me about your experience of everything, everywhere, all at once.
Oh my God. I loved this movie. I love how there's such deep mystical understanding that's baked into the foundational layer of this cake, and then there's just like fistfuls of funfetti smashed on top, like the butt plug jokes, like and the nihilism cooked into the everything bagel, in just the visual feast that it was. So I don't know, the directors, the Daniels, did this music video beforehand. Do you know about this?
Oh no, I haven't seen this.
Yeah, look this up. I think it was that song, like Turned Down for What? Okay. It's something obnoxious and absurd, and you have to watch this music video. It's like it's an amazing feast for the eyes. Like, that's like absurd in a lot of, like how absurd it is, like the hot dog finger situation, and like yet also built on truth that, like, you can listen to very serious, high level theoretical physicists who talk about the multiverse and about how, like, if there's a possibility, then it does exist. Like there are infinite realities that have to exist because of this equation, which has to do with uncertainty, and it has to do with Schrodinger's uncertainty principle. So, like, if you look at these equations seriously and you interpret them as they are, like, written, then that means that necessarily every possible outcome is a universe that exists. And then, break that down into like an 8-bit map of like, there's the hot dog finger. To get there, you've got to paper cut your finger,
And there's a Hollywood universe, and or I guess in the Hollywood universe, the main character, or the mom, was like what was she, a martial artist or something? Yeah.
Pinky Kung Fu.
Yeah, Kung Fu. And of course, I don't know if you've seen Kung Fu Hustle.
Oh yeah.
So, like, they're paying ode to that entire, like, genre. Also one of the best movies I've ever seen, Kung Fu Hustle. So good. Yeah. I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once on my birthday in July, and it was such an interesting experience because I was supposed to go out on my birthday, and then my friend's flight was canceled, and I had no other plans. So I ended up staying in and watching this movie. And this was the film. I feel like everyone wants to do a film about the multiverse these days, right? Sure. But, like, this was the film that I was waiting for someone to do about the multiverse, because I always conceptualized the multiverse as, what if the multiverse was everything that we say it is, and also the best verse to be in is the one where you essentially achieve a higher state of consciousness. And I feel like that was the arc of the film. And the most brilliant part to me, and I guess this is a bit of a spoiler alert for those who may not have seen it, but the most profound, best part to me was when the mother realized that she had to allow her daughter to make her own decision. Like, at the very end, that whole letting go was so brilliant. I do wonder, though, that if I hadn't known all the things I know now about Buddhism, and about Zen practice if I would have been able to even comprehend this film. Or if I would have been confused about it. Like, I don't know. But it seems to be popular and it seems to be getting a lot of rave reviews. So begs the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of brilliant part about it, is that, like, no matter how much depth and understanding of like the universe and enlightenment and Buddhism and everything that you do, your teenage daughter will still fuck you up.
Yeah.
You're like, you know?
Yeah.
And like,
yeah.
I love like how, it traverses those like layers of humanity. And, you know, I was just like bawling. It's like so like human and so real. And like, I relate to that. Like, this girl, like, she gets her mind blown about the universe,
and she gets really depressed.
Slips into nihilism. Like, it's literally what that's
literally what happens.
Universes, and then like is like turns into a terror, and like literally that's what happens. Like, that's what happened to me. Like, I drank like a fish for like 7 more years. After, because it was like, well, whatever. Like, I'm gonna dress like Elvis and like turn my head backwards and like blow everybody up into glitter, because like, fuck everything.
It's interesting. So my roommate and I were talking about this, and this maps onto what we're talking about now. The difference between emo music and the blues, as it relates to understanding, I guess, the first of the Four Noble Truths as a portal into compassion. So my roommate argued that emo music is sort of a representation of the realization that yes, life is suffering, but then you're like raging against it, right? You're angry, you're bitter, you're raging against it, all these things. Whereas the blues, you drop sort of one level deeper into the suffering and you sit with the suffering. And it opens up this portal of compassion for the rest of humanity or the rest of the world, because now you're having this universally human experience that everyone else also experiences. And so I feel like there's this interesting musical orientation or difference in musical orientation that the mother went through or came to, in contrast to the daughter. And obviously the daughter at some point is sort of like, you know, I think saw a glimpse of what the mother saw. But as a musical comparison, it's interesting to think about those two genres as sort of like, that's the emotional resonance that each of these two genres of music are trafficking in.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of why, like, I'm so into Buddhism, is that it's like not like these are human conditions. It's talking about, you know, universally true things. Like, we're all experience. Like, the process of becoming a human is traumatic. Like, you come into the world as like you know, wide-eyed baby that like everything is magical and beautiful and you're held in arms of love, ideally. And then like anything is possible, and then just boundaries start sliding on it. And it's like, actually, no. Like, no, you gotta be an animal and gotta survive, and it's hard out there, and everything's not perfect. And inherently that's like a traumatic experience. Like, it's not possible to come into the world without your boundaries getting slammed in your face. That process leads us to a place where we have the ability to like transcend it. Like, you have to go through it in order to transcend it. In every different step along the way, you're going to have different experiences. And like, that's, you know, in that expression in art is like emo and blues. You know,
and
then, you know, pop probably somewhere in there.
Somewhere along the way.
Maybe that's the delusional, like, entitled baby syndrome, is like everything
along adolescence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. I like that too, though. That's a part of the whole ride, you know?
Yeah. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just don't stay there.
Yeah.
Don't stay there forever. Awesome. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Do you have any last thoughts or words you'd like to share with the audience? Do you want to say what your Insta handles, that sort of thing? Where can we find you on social?
Sure. My Instagram handle is Kata Knows. That's KATAKNOWS. Yeah. That's what it is.
That's what it is. That's what it is for now.
Kata Knows. That's the place I am. I'm like sad that it's no longer photography, but like whatever.
I mean, last I checked, it was a lot of photography, but
Instagram?
Oh, you're saying the whole platform. I was talking about your account.
Oh, no, yeah. I mean, like, I just don't know when there was a still image in my feed last.
Oh, I see.
And like the photography community is really bummed about the direction that Instagram is going.
Yeah.
So, like, make Instagram photos again.
Yeah.
TikTok. But
yeah, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, it feels like we're sliding down the vibrational channels back into the world, back into the muck.
Into the muck.
You know, that's the last thing I will leave with, is that one of my favorite stocking stuffer gifts I've ever gotten is this pocket Pema Chodron book. I don't know if you know Pema, but
yeah, of course, my heart.
The first time I opened this little stocking stuffer, it was on this essay about the journey goes down, not up, and how that a lot of times we think about spiritual awakening as like climbing a mountain, where you kind of end up on this top kind of peak experience, but
you're actually descending into the 7 layers of hell.
Yeah, the true framework we should think about in this kind of like bodhicitta, bodhisattva spirit is actually like descending in an inverse mountain, like descending into the muck of the earth, and really being down there in the water, in the pain and the insecurity and the fears and the humanity, and being here, you know, instead of trying to escape and enlighten. So
love that. Thank you, Sun. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, this is so great. Good to see you. You're awesome.
Good to see you too.